I'm delighted to have with us today Gavin McClafferty, who is the founder of 1981 Ventures, which he's going to tell us about shortly, but also someone with a long track record in the field of collaborative innovation, from the user side, from deploying it in various organizations, and now a facilitator of collaborative innovation. Gavin, thank you so much for sparing some time. Maybe we could start with a little bit of your journey. Can you tell us how you've got to 1981 Ventures and what you're doing now in this field?
Thanks very much, John. It's a pleasure to have an opportunity to speak to you today. So I guess for me, I've been involved in this space for quite some time, and almost 6 years ago, I found myself in a situation where I was working in the oil and gas world for a company called Subsea, and the market in oil and gas changed almost overnight. There was a collapse globally in the price of oil and gas, and what that did was it basically forced the entire industry to have to think differently, to have to respond in ways that it hadn't previously. So to give some context to that, the price went from being around $140 a barrel to below 40 in the space of almost hours. And organizations needed to be in a space where they could either adapt quickly or pivot towards a more resilient and different future. And what I did with Subsea 7 at that time was I was brought into a new role as Open Innovation Lead to help develop an open innovation program, develop a partner ecosystem, develop ways of working that would allow us to frame our most complex challenges, and also develop relationships with companies outside of our supply chain and on organizations where we could articulate these challenges to and bring insights back into the organization. That was a program which was very successful. It ran for a number of years. And last year, in amongst the global pandemic, I recognized that there was an opportunity to reach out and to help others and other companies that were struggling to unlock their most complex challenges. And I took the opportunity to found my own organization called 1981 Ventures. And essentially what I've been doing there is I've been working with companies to help them frame some of their most complex challenges, help them to unlock the problems that keep them awake at night, and to bring insights back into the organization. And it's been a lot of fun so far.
It sounds amazing and interesting that it was almost an experience that was originally born out of crisis, that as you described in the Subsea 7 in the oil industry, business as usual or innovation as usual wasn't going to cut it. It needed a sort of crowdsourced, all hands to the pump approach.
Absolutely.
Could you give us a couple of examples? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, there's some really good examples of that, and usually what I do is I talk about a philosophy where it's around 10x, not 10%. So if you think about business improvement programs, they're really good, and they help our organizations optimize things by a few percent here and there. And most organizations can do that and run them successfully, but there becomes limitations with these programs. And the limitation essentially is that you're limited because you're only saying, I'm only thinking about internally, I'm only thinking about how to optimize a discrete process and get to a particular outcome. But if you say, well, I want to optimize things by a magnitude, that requires a fundamentally different mindset. And part of that, which is really interesting, I saw this amazing quote on that, and it's by Oren Harari, and he said this a little over a decade ago, just before he died, and he said, the electric light did not come from the continuous improvement of candles. and I think he couldn't have spoken, a truer word, where sometimes there are things that you need to do that take the organization to the next level. And that needs to go beyond, it needs to challenge the status quo. It needs to challenge how you work, how you collaborate, and how you think.
That, for me, that's fascinating because, in a sense, a lot of the discussion around collaboration platforms and so on has been located still in that zone that goes back hundreds of years to the suggestion scheme, which is if we can get everyone's mind on the job, we can improve things. But very often that got linked with the continuous improvement, which is very good, and a lot of employees can get involved. But what you're describing is saying, no, let's spread that net more widely. Let's involve other players. So it's kind of ramping up the next notch in this process.
So one thing that I see a lot of companies kind of fall down with is they sort of take this continuous improvement philosophy that's evolved over hundreds of years, and then they get stuck in, you know, almost in this period of time where they focus on work by people like Deming, where they run these sort of suggestion schemes, but what they fail to recognize is that people like to solve problems. So if you communicate needs and you communicate problems to your key stakeholders or your employees or your suppliers, then inevitably what they're going to come back with is they're going to give you some good ideas on how to overcome them. But when you have these suggestion schemes and all you're doing is gathering ideas rather than communicating business needs, there's no sponsor, there's no desire for the organization to truly move forward in most things. So if you flip that around and say, we've got these challenges that are keeping us awake at night, we'd like to solve them, we need your help. What can you do to help us unlock these? And that's where life starts to get really interesting, because you inevitably put your organization in a place where you gather up some great ideas, and along that way you also solve things that you hadn't thought of at the time. So you'll solve things that maybe you didn't truly understand or truly recognize when you were describing that challenge. And then you also end up in a situation where you start to connect people and motivate them, and they feel like, you know, they have an opportunity to engage and add value. So it's really kind of this a journey where the only outcome, you know, is really quite positive.
I guess for me, the question that kind of asks is, okay, so I get it that getting more minds, engaging people inside and outside, that's great, but that's an easy slogan. How do you actually make it happen? I wonder if you could comment a bit on the how.
Yeah, so there's two kind of things that are kind of challenging. So the first part, which is the most challenging, is around leadership commitment and organizational culture. So you have to have that space within your organization that says that they're willing to even try this in the first place, that they're willing to look in different ways and break away from how they've been working. And that's usually driven by some sort of catalyst or event. And you know, as in the case that I described, it's driven by a market event. The second part is you obviously need to be able to articulate the types of challenges that you have as an organization in ways that are either internal or external, in ways that can either be completely open or can be done in a confidential mode where you can obviously protect commercial sensitivities. And that takes a bit of practice and it takes a bit of hand holding. So, you know, that's obviously something that I work with companies to do. But at the time, when we founded this program with Subsea 7, we worked with an incredible organization, so part of the University of Cambridge Institute for Manufacturing, and they gave us support to do that. And that allowed us to move very quickly and to make years worth of progress in the space of months. And then essentially, when you have these ways of working, what you need to be able to do after that is to say, well, where am I going to connect this to? How do I develop an ecosystem? So who am I going to be reaching out to? Is it our own employees? Is it our supply chain? Or is it much broader than that? Is it a curated network? So organizations like Nine Sigma or Yet2 or Innocentive or others, who all have amazing networks, who have deep expertise in certain areas. And when I worked with Subsea 7, we first started off with some engineering focused challenges around materials and design optimization of different types of pipelines, inspection tools. And we communicated these needs openly through Nine Sigma. We had an innovation gallery, which is essentially a portal. And the first two challenges that we released, we got back some phenomenal proposals, things that the organization wouldn't have found otherwise, and also items that came back with new ways of thinking, unimaginable levels of insight. So it was a great success. And we went on to release 10 challenges to the market in total and run a number of confidential technology search projects. And in every single case, what I can tell you is that not only did we solve the challenge that we're setting out to unlock, we also found things that we hadn't maybe expected. And one of them, just to give an example of, was when we released our very first challenge, which was around optimizing the structure of a particular pipeline. We had someone from a local university respond and give us some incredible insights into his background, which was in a different industry. And he had worked in the aviation sector, optimizing structures for airplanes. And he came back and said, I believe that there's some transferable knowledge here. I believe I can optimize the structure by a magnitude. And he then went on to do that in a very rapid timescale. And he also trained some of our employees and shared that knowledge, which was really incredible. It's incredible to see someone come forward and just completely change their way of thinking in a matter of hours and days.
That's amazing. Some great examples. And I guess it chimes very much with this idea that smart businesses don't simply say, oh, yes, open innovation, we'll let those people out there do the work for us. It's much more a case of saying, we've thought really long and hard, but maybe someone else has a very different take on it. And that sounds to me a fascinating part of it. Please carry on.
It's really fascinating because, I mean, it comes back to kind of Joy's law. And obviously he said some decades ago, no matter who you are, most of the smartest people work for someone else. And a lot of organizations find that a little bit kind of flippant and aggressive. But if you flip it around for a second and say, well, actually, if you look at it from a population point of view, the world has over 7.8 billion people on it. And regardless of your organization's size, you're just a small percentage of that. So being able to reach out and tap into knowledge that exists across industries, across different parts of the world, makes good business sense. And it also gives you perspectives from other industries, other cultures, things that maybe you weren't aware of, or insights or signals in the market that can be invaluable to your organization.
Yeah, I guess it rings a bell for me as someone who's looked at innovation for quite a long time. There's an old chestnut called "Not Invented Here," and history's full of examples where great ideas were offered sometimes on a plate to companies and they turned them down. Can you comment on how that fits with your model?
Absolutely. So it's really funny that you say that. It's something that I've came up against, but the one thing that I've really recognized over the last, I guess, 6 years, possibly longer, but certainly the last 6, is that we've reached a point in history where time is becoming an organization's most precious currency. So any organization can acquire world-leading capabilities virtually on demand through the use of ecosystems. So if you think down that route, then any organization that decides to stand still is going to have an associated cost with that. So there's a cost to doing nothing. There's a cost to not making progress. And if you divest in innovation programs, that's where life starts to get quite interesting. And Martin Harbeck, just earlier today, shared something on, and he's the group director for Facebook, and he's really passionate about technologies. And he said something I thought which was really interesting. And he said, Blockbuster continued to grow for 7 years after Netflix was launched. Kodak continued to grow for 6 years after the first digital camera was sold. BlackBerry continued to grow for 4 years after Apple released their iPhone. Disruption often comes with a delay. Innovation should be our priority long before it's needed. I couldn't agree more with him. Yeah. I think that those are some incredible examples. And I find the story of Netflix and Blockbuster particularly interesting, how Netflix were in a situation where they went to Blockbuster to get funding from them, and they were laughed out of the room and basically told that their business model was going to go nowhere. And we know the story of how Blockbuster had one store left in globally
Yeah.
in entirety. And obviously how Netflix has been an incredible success story. So we know that if you stand still and you don't look at things differently, or you don't explore the market, or you don't explore where technologies exist, then the story inevitably is going to end in a difficult way.
Yeah, it's a lovely quote. I may borrow that Martin Harbour one. It sounds good. But you've used a word a couple of times, and it really seems to characterize this new innovation environment. You've talked about ecosystems, and in a sense, this is not we can do it all alone, we know everything, but rather we have to connect, which is great.
Yeah.
And we know there are so many people who could help in the different ways you've already described. But then the big job comes, and it's probably the space you're working in now. How do you make things connect? Where are the bridges? Who are the brokers? How does it connect? I wonder if you could comment on that.
Yeah, so I think that one of the difficult things for organizations is to recognize that these type of approaches or ways of working actually exist in the first place. And what many organizations look at is they have, this amazing workforce working for them, which is great. And they have a supply chain, and it's often difficult for them to either share some of their challenges with their supply chain, or for their supply chain to equally go back to the organization and say, we have this amazing solution. You need to be aware of this. It could really help you. It could collapse costs. It could unlock this next project.
Yeah.
So the other side of that is, if you want to look obviously beyond your organization and beyond your supply chain, then there are lots of organizations that have these expert communities that can form part of an ecosystem that can allow you to unlock these types of challenges. And inevitably, what that takes is someone that has some vision in your organization that can reach out and can plug into these communities and work with your internal stakeholders to articulate the types of challenges that you have, and then manage your innovation program with these communities. And as I said earlier, the end results inevitably are game changing in almost every case. But what I would say is that these types of communities allow you to be able to solve decades old problems in the space of weeks and days. And I've seen this happen time after time. So, I've worked with organizations like Yet2 and Nine Sigma extensively. There's a case where I'd worked with Yet2 on a very commercially sensitive problem. We had a particular piece of subsea structure that we wanted to optimize. It was a challenge that had existed for almost 30 years. And we worked with them, and over the space of 12 weeks, we found 3 solutions to that particular problem. And the end result was that problem was worth somewhere in the region of $100 million to our organization.
Wow.
And these are the types, as I say, these are the types of outcomes that are possible. But what I would also say is that this isn't just an approach that can be used for one industry or the other. It can be applied to almost any industry. And I've seen this used very successfully with organizations that are engineering focused. So organizations like NASA and the federal government of the United States have run very extensive open innovation programs with great levels of success. I've also seen programs like this run with huge success in the pharma industry, in healthcare. I'm aware of some really incredible programs in the automotive space, and more recently, one of the most successful open innovation programs I've seen is based on the concept of open banking, and is being run by the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, who are absolutely blazing a trail in this space.
This is fascinating in the sense of it's got almost universal applicability. It reminds me of the concept of lean, which was born in the car industry, changed manufacturing, spread to services, public sector. It's the same kind of level of mindset change.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, essentially, any organization that is, has a wide population base or works in in many locations or many different cultures can benefit hugely from these programs just by leveraging both its employees and ecosystem thinking is just an incredible opportunity.
Yeah, and I guess we've tragically seen through this wretched pandemic that this notion of drawing different people together, rather like you had with a crisis, can draw amazing partnerships and accelerate innovation in what's been critical in vaccines, in ventilators, and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like Microsoft did some research in this space, and their feeling was that in the first sort of 3 months of lockdown earlier last year, that over a decade's worth of digitalization occurred in that time globally, which is pretty phenomenal. And we can see that obviously through just simple things in the UK, especially where, if you want to book an appointment to see a GP, you can do that online now. If you want to go to a recycling centre and drop off some cardboard, you can do that online with, through your local council. Just things that people would take for granted in some other countries. So, I think Norway's quite an advanced country in terms of digital capacity and what's available to its citizens, but I think the UK has lagged behind in some ways for a little while. So it's been interesting to see us play catch up. And I think also the rise in digital payments, again, that's an area that's progressed rapidly. Very few people, understandably, want to be handling large amounts of cash physically at the moment. But we've seen digital payments and lots of other things and applications developed that previously wouldn't have existed, maybe in our own country.
Yeah. And this whole sort of digital revolution, in a sense, in the world of innovation, that's, as you've said several times today, potentially a game changer because it leverages vast oceans of knowledge rather than little pools of it. But it does come back again to how we make it happen. And I wonder if you could comment a bit on the challenges that we've yet to deal with in terms of really getting this thing to happen mainstream.
So in terms of going mainstream, I think that there's a few things that are kind of challenging for some companies. So I think we've kind of reached a point in history, and particularly in this pandemic, where we need to ask ourselves, are we in or are we all in? So the organizations that pursue short-term value, that fail to embrace innovation, they're doing so mostly at the expense of what they perceive to be efficiency, and this creates and results in creating an organization that's fragile and exposed to risk. So there's an underinvestment in growth-oriented bets. There's an impact on long-term market for these organizations, and also an opportunity where they could be exposed to environmental issues in the future. But what I would also say is that there's also the other side of this, which is around the employees and freelancers, and there's a big signal there where people are saying, we no longer wish to work 9 till 5. We no longer all wish to work in the office. Some people want a hybrid model where they can be in the office for part of the week and work from home. Other people are very happy to go and work in an office again and be reconnected to those around them in a different way. But I think we've reached a point where the genie has been let out of the bottle, and I do think that we're going to see people think differently now and respond to this pandemic in ways that we hadn't maybe anticipated before.
I mean, in many ways, that paints a rather optimistic picture for innovation in the future. The phrase that's often been used recently, collective intelligence, and I think that leveraging that is very much the story you've been telling us.
Yeah.
One question it does raise for me is, of course, this question of it's all about knowledge, and that knowledge was rather unevenly distributed, but now we have a way of linking it together, especially if we allow our minds to expand or our company horizons to expand to pick it up. But the danger perhaps is that we might reinvent wheels. We might have just so much knowledge bubbling around, we don't actually know what's there. People are talking a little these days about curating knowledge, managing the knowledge. I know we used to talk about knowledge management, but that's really coming back to the centre. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting observation. So I think in the past we had, there have been particular phases where people have been very passionate about knowledge management, and some organizations have built platforms to gather up knowledge and hope that individuals and employees will take time to go through these databases and somehow pull out the information that they might need that may be of benefit to them. What I would say now is that's becoming more, or in my observation is that that's becoming more targeted and it's becoming quite interesting. So what I've seen organizations do is say, well, we want to benefit from collective intelligence. We wish to communicate challenges to people. We wish to pull in insights on those. But there are also maybe other themes that the organization recognizes that it needs to gain knowledge on. So organizations that were typically in the past hadn't used approaches like technology scouting or technology landscaping are becoming much more interested in that to eliminate this process of reinventing the wheel. I mean, no organization wants to spend a year or 2 years developing a product and millions of pounds or millions of dollars just to find out that they could have partnered with someone else early on and unlocked all that benefit through a partnership and made rapid progress in that time to either bring a solution to market or unlock a problem for a client. And I think that sort of mentality is becoming more common now, where people recognize that they don't have that luxury of time. They can't afford to spend the next 3 years bringing that product to market only to find out that someone else had something close by or in another industry that they could have benefited from.
Yeah, I think that's increasingly the name of the game. If you characterize the last century, it was the organization as the center of innovation. That's where it happened. These days, we're in a world of networks and systems and ecosystems.
Yeah, there was something really fascinating that I saw. So there was a slide that I had seen last year that talked about patent applications, and it was a slide that focused on patent applications since the late 1800s and just the astronomical rise of intellectual property and patents. And what that actually showed was that throughout the various patent centers in the world was that most of the innovation that had occurred throughout that timeline was actually happening now. It was happening within our very own lifetimes. And it's quite interesting to think that most of the scientists and most of the innovators and inventors that have ever existed throughout time are alive today. So, that's a big signal that, that we can tap into that intelligence and move forward quite rapidly. The other thing that was really interesting about that was that early last year, MIT published an article essentially saying that Moore's law had reached an end, that chip manufacturing had declined, and that innovation in software was going to accelerate to a point where where that would take the world into a completely different space. And this research has been really well documented, and it got me thinking at the time. And it's really essentially about people being more connected, new capabilities coming to the forefront, people upskilling. It's a fascinating space.
Yeah, and I guess for me, innovation is always about creating value from knowledge, and
Yeah.
that can be commercial, but it can also be social value. And I think many of the things we've talked about here very much represent that space. But I guess the key then is we're now in a sea of knowledge, and finding better ways to connect is going to be the key to the future. Gavin, thank you so much for sparing that time. It's given me so many ideas about new areas we could look at. And also, you've raised some questions which hopefully you and your colleagues and others will work on in the near future. But for now, thank you so much.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to talk to you.